Good morning. Welcome to all the listeners. I'm really excited as we get this interview rolling today. I have with me executive and leader John Collins. He really specializes in those high stakes organizations and helping them thrive in times of chaos. And that's what we're going to be talking about. I mean, right now we are in the midst of a black swan. No one knew this was coming. And John is now working with organizations and helping them to really thrive during this time. So welcome to the show, John.
Thanks, Jessica. Good to be with you.
Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about you and your background, and then we'll dive in.
Sure. Well, as you said, I'm a high stakes executive coach and leadership consultant. I also do a lot of strategic facilitations for various clients. So I focus on clients that have what I call a mission of high public consequence. And so people that work in high stakes environments are people and teams that make the avoidance of catastrophe a routine part of their job. So when they mess up in their work, they end up on the front page of the newspapers. And that involves a lot of different kinds of industries and professionals. But I spent 20 years in forensic science, which is how I really took an interest in this concept of high stakes professions, high stakes occupations. I was one of the forensic investigators in the bombing of the 1996 Olympics back when it was hosted in Atlanta. And so for the last 6 years, I've been working in private practice.
Love it. And thanks for telling a little bit about high stakes, because that was a new terminology when you first presented that to me. What are some of the industries for those that are really considered high stakes in your opinion?
Well, some examples would be engineering, medicine, accounting. One of my clients is actually the executive leadership team of an international airport. And so these are all clients that have, something in common. And that is that the work that they do, number one, is there is a high stakes, high pressure nature to it. But the work tends to be intellectually, technically, or ethically intensive. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of pressure on these environments. And what's really important to understand about that is that means that the quality of the leadership that is provided and the professionalism and expertise that people have really has to be top notch if they're going to be successful.
That makes sense. So now tell me what's going on. I mean, you're working with people. I'm sure your phone was ringing as soon as this all went down. What are your thoughts? Like, how are these organizations really navigating the current challenges?
Well, the thing that I found was, and you may have run into the same thing, Jessica, is that I found that my clients really had to turn their attention to their clients because their clients were starting to panic and it's just kind of there's a major paradigm shift that happens in a very short period of time. And so you have to give them a little bit of space to breathe and adjust to the circumstances on the ground. And then in my capacity as a coach and a consultant, then I just start to reach out and just ask people how they're doing and let them know that you're there for them and try to provide perspective when you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what do you think? I mean, to me, it was very fascinating to watch the response, at least on social media, of how people reacted. Some people were very fear-based. Other people's were that beacon of light. I kept encouraging my clients and my followers to stay on the positive side of things, because a fear is not going to do anything but attract more negativity into your life. So how are you seeing yours fall into one of these two categories, and how can they shift?
It's interesting, and I think you and I have talked about this before, that actually the study shows that only about 10% of people have what we would call natural leadership ability. So these times of adversity, how you take kids like to one of those to do the nighttime bowling, and they have the UV lights and people's clothing glow and the bowling balls glow and that kind of stuff. Adversity does that for leadership, that under adversity, it's like a light, and it causes the true leaders to kind of glow and rise forward. And the reason that they do is they do something very important. And that is that they recognize that the adversity that is before them is an urgency. It's not a crisis. Crisis is something that we create in our heads. An urgency is a set of responsibilities and tasks that we have to take care of because something has happened in our strategic environment that requires a change. And the true leaders, the people that are really effective and they know how to lead in a high stakes situation, They simply recognize that it's a set of urgencies and their job is to meet those urgencies. The people that fail are the ones that create a crisis between their ears. And they start thinking, what does this mean in the long term? And they start to have distorted views of reality. So to your point, it's one of the most important things is you've got to stay positive and you have to focus on your mission and your goals, and keep that mission and your goals on your focal plane, as I like to call it. It's like focusing binoculars. Some things go out of focus, some things stay in focus, but you've got to keep your goals in focus during the adversity. Otherwise, you're going to lose credibility as a leader, and you're going to lose your team, and your team's going to suffer.
Yes, and for anybody that's an influencer, lose your followers as well.
Absolutely.
And I agree 100%. I think it really does magnetize who you are. And so it's very interesting. I found the whole situation really fascinating to watch. And to your point, it's like you still have to focus on what you were moving towards before. Like, what is your goal as an organization? Where are you going? And not lose sight of that and get distracted and pulled into all this other drama. But also don't create drama, because that's, if you're creating a crisis in your mind, then you're going to suddenly see drama all around you, because that is the mindset that you're taking on.
Right. And, to add to that, the antidote to fear is information. And so one of the things that people really have to do, and this is something that I've helped several of my clients with, is that people are scared. They have people on their teams, employees that they're scared to get sick. They're scared to bring the virus home to a loved one or a child or a parent that they're caring for. And one of the first things that you have to do is you have to identify what are your sources of authoritative information. And make a commitment as a team that, look, we are only going to get our information from authoritative sources. We're not going to buy into the fear mongering. We're not going to buy into the grandstanding that different people do and in different types of positions. We're going to make our choices based on authoritative information. And, we're going to have to take some risks. There's always risk in life, but we're going to make calculated risks. Right. But we've got to make sure that we saturate ourselves with reliable information, because if we do that, then we're going to make smarter choices.
Which is brilliant. I wish that the world would follow that.
Yeah, we do. We do.
Authoritative sources. That's right. Let go of the fear mongering, and just stay and positive. So what do you say to a leader right now that's struggling? They're dealing with their team, who you said is like worried about getting sick. They've had to lay people off. They're struggling to find that sense of confidence. Like, how do they pull themselves together if they were the best leader to begin with? Well,
first of all, like I said before, keep your goals on your focal plane. Right. You just because we're going through a difficult time right now doesn't mean we've been robbed of our future. There's a lot to look forward to. So we can't start hyper focusing on the virus or what's wrong. We have to keep our goals and our objectives on our focal plane. But leadership, it's interesting because leadership is really applied psychology in a strategic context. And the leaders that are going to succeed through this are ones who've really paid it forward. They've established good relationships with the members of their teams and their customers. They care about people. They enjoy people. They connect with people. And it's the solidity of those relationships that allow you to navigate effectively. So one thing that great leaders do, and that they have to do during a situation like this, is they have to learn how to navigate turbulence. Okay, so turbulence happens, but it doesn't take away your destination. So you can imagine being on an airplane and you hit some bumpy air and the pilots come out of the flight deck and jump out of the plane because they panic. That doesn't happen, right? You navigate the turbulence and you continue on to your destination, but that destination has to be very clear and you have to communicate it. But I would just add one more thing, is that if you have anybody that's in a leadership position that they are struggling or they feel a little bit directionless or aimless, I'm a really big believer in the power of genuineness. Never be afraid to tell people that you're struggling or that you're impacted by this or that you're frustrated, but resolve yourself that you're going to move forward despite that. But people tend to gravitate more and support people who they know are real. Sure. and who are struggling. We tend to avoid people that we feel like are putting on a show or trying to put on an act, because we don't really know who that person is. We're interacting with the grandstanding as opposed to the real person. So be real, don't panic in front of your people. But just say, look, I'm struggling. I need some help. And if you feel like you've made mistakes or you don't like the direction you're going, admit it. Say, look, I don't like the path that I've been on here. I want to make a change and I need some help.
I love it. And I love what you just ended that with, was you said, I need some help. Because a lot of people perceive vulnerability as a sign of weakness. And what happens with leaders is their ego gets in the way, and they won't admit they're wrong, and they won't admit they need help. And that creates a disconnect between you and your team, to your point, because you're not being authentic. They can't relate to you. And really being vulnerable can allow you to step into a place of empowerment. And
huge empowerment. There's so much power that comes from being vulnerable, because when you're vulnerable, you're being real. And when you're real, people will they'll gravitate to you. They'll want to support you. They'll engage. But the moment you start putting on a show or put up what I like to call the brick wall, which is, the facade of your, like you said, the facade of your ego, or who you're trying to look like as opposed to who you really are, boy, people can see right through that, and then they don't trust you. And once you lose their trust, you lose your confidence. And when you lose their confidence, then you can't lead anymore.
Right. So it's interesting, because when this all plays out, I'm sure there's going to be a mass exit of certain leaders and an entrance of new, like, emerging leaders who are ready to be that next level leader that they need to be. Let me ask you something. If a leader were to come to you and they say, listen, John, I know I'm not the most effective leader. So they admit that they need help. They know their weak spots. What are some things that you help them to develop to be more effective?
That's more common than not, what the scenario that you just asked, Jessica. So the most people that are in leadership positions, they don't enter that leadership position with, as I said before, kind of natural leadership abilities. Only about 10% of us have that. But so when I coach individuals, either individually or as small groups, one of the things that I tell them, and I really believe this strongly because I've actually experienced it, is you want to establish what's called cadence. So what cadence is a rhythm or a pattern, that a cyclical pattern of things that you put on your schedule, that it's the antidote to chaos. So right now it's a very chaotic environment right now because there's so much uncertainty, right? And so chaos or cadence is the antidote to chaos. So that means that one of the biggest, most important tools that any leader has in her or his toolbox is their calendar. Set your staff meetings and do them regularly. So don't, like when I teach my workshops and I talk to people and say, how often do you have your staff meetings? They'll say, oh, once a month. And then I'll say, well, when is that? And typically they'll say, well, when we feel like we're ready or we've got something to talk about. And I'll, how often do you cancel that staff meeting? And they'll chuckle and they'll say, well, we cancel it quite a bit if somebody's out of town or we don't have something to talk about. And what I tell them is that you just introduced more chaos into your environment. You created unpredictability. So you want to create predictability in your environment. You want to create rhythm. So I like it when I ask people in my workshops or people that I coach and I say, when do you have your staff meetings? I like to hear things like, we do it on the third Tuesday of every month at 10 a.m. in our conference room, and we'd never deviate from it. That's cadence. So there's a lot of things that people can do to establish cadence. So you don't have to be a superhuman leader or have just, unbelievable emotional intelligence to do this. But it's remarkable the power that you can have over your team and the effectiveness you can have as a leader when you just start to become more predictable and more rhythmic in how you function and communicate.
Right. And what's so interesting is the parallel to this with like email marketing. When they've done studies, and when you send your email out at the same time on the same days, it creates trust and actually greater open rates, more click-through rates, greater sales. And people who adopt this, when they veer from it, will often get emails fired fired off from their subscribers saying, where's the email? What's going on? Because they become so used to that certainty of this is the email coming to this person daily or, weekly at this time. And we thrive in some sense of control or certainty, anything that, because life is, uncontrollable. So anything, like you said, that creates that cadence reassures us, it comforts us.
It does, and what it does is it creates structure in our professional or in our strategic environment. If we're talking about, in a professional context, the analogy that I like to use, Jessica, is I like to use like my arm as an analogy. My arm has both a skeleton, bone, and muscle. So it's useless to me if I don't have both. Okay, so that bone creates limits beyond which I can't go without hurting myself, right? And so cadence establishes a framework, it establishes that structure. But it's really interesting that people tend to be more effective and more innovative when there is some structure in the environment. And cadence provides that because people know what the boundaries are. And so when you know what the boundaries are, then you feel free to innovate and explore and to ideate and communicate and all this kind of stuff. But when we don't have boundaries, when we don't have structure, then people feel kind of lost, and it adds to that feeling of chaos in the environment. And once that chaos really starts to get into your culture, then people just you lose productivity, you lose efficiency, and you start to see more disengagement and kind of a drop in morale, and eventually the whole team suffers.
Which makes sense because there's no boundaries. There's a sense of disconnect, overwhelm, overthinking, distraction, like everything's going to come up. I think a lot of people really struggle with structure, and that's what holds them back, because to your point, structure can create the boundaries of time, which allow you to free up your headspace to create. And, as entrepreneurs or organizations, that's what we're here to do. We're here to innovate. And if we don't have that space to do that, how can we move forward?
Right. And, and I think, like I said, going back to the thing about the COVID-19 illness and what we're dealing with coronavirus and all this kind of stuff, that the teams that will thrive through this, or that are thriving through this, are doing so because of what they did before the crisis hit.
Right.
And so you kind of earn your right in many ways. It sounds kind of strange to say that, but you earn your right to navigate turbulence or adversity in the smoothest way possible. And so from a leadership standpoint, you have to have been connected with your people. You have to be able to have a leadership style and a communication style that is engaging and it motivates people and so forth. But those that didn't do that ahead of this urgency before us, they're the ones that are going to struggle, and they're the ones that they're not glowing when the light comes on. To use my previous analogy.
Yeah. And so we know this crisis is going to come to an end. We know about states are opening up. Some companies are opening back up with different measures in place. How can teams, organizations, and their leaders really prepare for the recovery phase of post-COVID-19?
Well, there's a couple things. I think, first of all, we have to recognize that because we've gone through this, there's some significant things about our strategic environment that have now changed, right? So we want to, ideally, we want to get back to normal as much as we can, but we have to acknowledge that some things have changed. Some things for the better, some things for the worse. And we have to have a conversation about that. So, I've had a couple clients that I've talked to recently that have made, and I think a lot of people do this, have made the mistake because of the pressure that they're feeling with this COVID-19, that they are recoiling inward and they're not communicating as much. And it's actually the opposite that has to happen. When you're going through adversity, you've got to be communicating more. So if you are having monthly staff meetings, you should be having weekly staff meetings. The conversation should be constant. But we want to talk about what is it about our strategic environment that has changed? What threats do we have to mitigate? But also, what are some opportunities that may have arisen for us because of this? And so having that conversation, and this is where and I really believe this, that the number one skill a leader can have is to be a great facilitator of conversation, and to not dominate the conversation, but get people talking so that these ideas can emerge. Because how well your team does in the aftermath of this is going to depend on the nature of the conversation that you're having, the ideas that you're allowing to come forward. And then if you do that right, not only can you recover from this, you can thrive.
I love it. And it's so true. It is about facilitation. I never really thought about it that way, because the genius is in each person that's sitting around that table. And if you're constantly just barking orders at them, how can any new ideas emerge? And not only to be able to hear them, but to kind of facilitate the banter that happens or the pushback, but allow that natural evolution of ideas to emerge.
Right.
Is so powerful.
Yeah, and I think one of the great heroes in the modern era was a guy that I don't think gets enough credit, and that was Abraham Maslow, who came up with he died in 1970, but he came up with what's called the Maslow hierarchy of needs. And one of the things he noted is that the top order need that human beings have is the need to be relevant, to self-actualize, as he said. And one of the things that you don't want any leader to do is to deprive your people from gaining that sense of relevance that comes from moving forward out of a crisis. And so as a leader, you do want to be facilitating that conversation. You want to let everybody play a role in the direction that you go as a team, and be talking about those things. Use a lot of what if questions. What if we did this? Or what about this? And have those kinds of brainstorming sessions, and just sit back and watch your people contribute, and take note of the ideas that are shared, because those ideas they're your future. So yeah, you may have had goals before this thing hit, and you may have had a mission statement, a vision statement, all that good stuff that we're all supposed to do as good leaders. But we want to look at that again now, because everything has changed on some level. So how can we incorporate that? What are the new opportunities? What are the new threats that we have to pay attention to? But again, it's all about facilitating that conversation and bringing everybody's minds together to bear on the issues.
Yeah, and I love that self-actualization. I'm a big fan of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you can meet all of them, you're golden.
Yeah, he was amazing.
Brilliant. Now, I know you were telling me before the show you had this really cool emotional intelligence assessment. Some of the listeners might want to take. So tell us a little bit about that and how people can take that free assessment.
So I have a assessment. It's called the Emotional Intelligence Assessment for High Stakes Professionals. And so I've studied, there's a lot of people out there that have taken an interest in emotional intelligence for very good reason, right? And I would argue that it's a continuation of some of Abraham Maslow's work, as well as I would say Dr. Stephen Covey back in the 80s and 90s and some others. But but there are certain things with regards to emotional intelligence that get cranked up a few notches in a high stakes environment. And so what my team and I did was over actually a couple of years designed an emotional intelligence assessment for high stakes professionals. So your listeners can go to criticalvictories.com/EQHSP. It's emotional intelligence for high stakes professionals. That Q is quotient, but so it's criticalvictories.com/EQHSP, and you can take the emotional intelligence assessment. And actually, in doing so, you will be part of our beta study that's going on right now. And then it will take you to a page where you can learn a little bit more about it. And what we're going to be doing over the course of the next year is anybody that takes that assessment, we're going to be then reaching out to them to let them know what were some of the averages, what did the data look like, because there's different domains of emotional intelligence that we look at that are very relevant to people that work in high stakes environments. So anybody can take it, and then after you take it, we'll get your information, and we will reach out to you with the data. So it's a fun exercise. It takes about 20 minutes to complete.
Awesome. So what we'll do is we will put that in the show notes and in the comments. And if you want that, feel free to comment below. And then after this is over, I know John would be happy to go back and answer any comments from the listeners. And if you want to get in touch with John, I included those links for his website, and also follow him on LinkedIn.
Great.
All right, John. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I really enjoyed interviewing you. I always enjoy our time together. And thank you for
Likewise.
doing what you do, helping these organizations thrive.
Oh, thanks, Jessica. I really enjoyed it.
All right, guys, take care for now, and we'll see you soon.